Hello everybody. It's been a while, but I'm finally getting this done. I want to say welcome to the 2024 Archer Guide. Just like the last time, I do want to say that the information in this video is just how I play the class and is by no means the only or the best way. This is just how I have found success on Archer. The current state of Archer, I would say it's definitely one of the best classes in large-scale PvP right now. The class does fall off a little bit when it comes to like uncapped small-scale PvP and 1v1s. However, it's not the worst, and you can definitely still make it work in a lot of situations. In PvE, with the recent changes and everything to Archer, it has definitely become one of the best classes in PvE as well, although it does require a little bit more effort. To start things off, we're going to go over a little overview of the skills. So we'll start with the bonds. For the bonds, there are definitely a few viable options still. Core Radiant Explosion is still a very viable option. It adds a bound to your Radiant Explosion, giving you a protected CC. This can be very good at dealing with oppressive melee classes. Grandbloom is also a very good option. This is my go-to option for large scale. This gives you a forward guard on your Grandbloom. This also makes your range trading capability a lot better. Uproot is still a very viable option as well. I typically use this for small scale things like AOS and small 1v1s and 2v2s, 3v3s, etc. This gives you super armor on your uproot, which will give you a protected float. It also makes the entire end duration super armor, so it also gives you more kiting capabilities. I'd say any of those three bonds are pretty strong right now. The other options are kind of lackluster. I would recommend trying all of them out and seeing which is the most effective for your type of playstyle. I'll quickly go over the Hotbar skills. Hotbar skills that I run are Ensnare, Watcher, Low Sweep, the third Bomb skill, Nature Shattering Arrow, or Earth's Judgment, whichever one you're taking, Righteous Smite, Double Tap, Shadebound Beam, Sunfall, Wrath of Nature, and Arrow Explosion. This one is completely optional. You can definitely just use the Shift F key input. I have just locked it and gotten used to casting it this way. Now for the locked skills, you're going to want to lock Storm of Light. I personally lock Arrow Explosion. This is completely optional, like I said before. Most people just play with this unlocked and use the key input to cast it. You also want to lock Earth Kick, and you'll definitely want to lock Shadow Hack. Also want to lock Watcher. The reason you have to lock Watcher is because it interferes with a key input to Tactical Strike from Pre-Awakening. And you'll also want to lock your evasion roll. I also want to quickly go over the Breath of the Spirit skill and how it works. A lot of people find the Breath of the Spirit skill kind of confusing, but basically what this skill does is it will alter the buff that you get from using Steady Breath, and it also alters what Exhale does. The skill by default will default to Breath Recover if you've never touched it before, and this is honestly the preferred option. There's some viability to using Breath Deceleration, as this is the only DP self-buff that we have available at all. The heals end up being very valuable anyways, and I would recommend just sticking with the heals using Breath Recover. While we're on that topic, I do also want to quickly go over what healing options you have available. You have a number of skills that will heal you that don't even require you to hit an enemy. These include Steady Breath, Exhale, Wrath of Nature, and Double Tap. In a total, using all of these skills will heal you for 1400 HP without even having to hit an enemy. On that note, if you are able to hit an enemy, Luthragons will heal you on hit, as well as the Flow Echo's Call. As far as Rabombs goes, not much has really changed. Our first for bomb skill is pretty much useless. You'll never use either of these skills, although they do look kind of cool. Second options are still relatively mediocre. I still typically run Radiant and Snare. This is a super armor, so you can use it to get some stamina back when you're running low on stamina, and it also is a slow. For your third options, both of these options are very viable. Nature Shattering Arrow tends to be my go-to for large scale and stuff still. When I'm doing smaller scale stuff, I will run Earth's Judgment. Earth's Judgment is a forward guard that pushes you back a little bit. It gives you a little bit of kiting potential. And Nature Shattering Arrow is still just on-demand range damage. One good thing about Nature Shattering is it's instant damage on demand, so it can be really good for like securing like that last little bit of HP as the enemies are running away. Now I want to quickly go over our BSR skills. Our BSR skills are okay outside of the 50%. The 10% Fullbloom is probably the best horse dismounting skill in the game. I get so many free kills in Node War just by getting dismounts with Fullbloom. Our 25% is what we'll spend the majority of our BSR on. This will add an iframe to our Zephyr Leap. It also adds a Stiffen to the first hit of it. Your 100% Radiant Explosion can be good in like niche situations. Sometimes I do get like multi-man bounds with the 100%. But in general, then you're going to be using the BSR Zephyr Leap. Now I'll quickly go over add-ons, crystals, and artifacts. These are my current add-ons that I run for uncapped content. These are the add-ons I currently run for capped content. And these are the add-ons I typically run for PvE. Keep in mind, with changes to the add-ons, you can kind of just tailor your add-ons now to your own liking and your own playstyle. I don't think there's any set in stone best add-ons. For crystals, I have a few different setups that I run. When I'm doing uncapped content, I typically run around with something like this. Keep in mind there are definitely different options. You can opt to run more damage instead of the spec evasions, for example. For capped content, I typically run something like this. You're basically just stacking as much HP as you can. For PvE, it really depends on the spot for the most part. Some spots have AP caps, some spots CC a lot, etc. So some spots you'll want resists and other things. For just like a general example of a PvE set, this is typically what I run. Keep in mind though, you'll want a Girin's tier instead of a Bong Wings tier. I just personally don't have one. For artifacts, I run ranged accuracy artifacts with a few different Lightstone sets that I swap between depending on the situation. For capped content, I typically run with target openings for the stamina and crit damage. If you only do capped content, then it would be worthwhile to throw your cap set into a max HP artifact instead of the ranged accuracy. For uncapped, I typically run all out attack. I build my archer very glass cannon, so this is pretty much the highest damage option I have available. I also have a maiming set that I swap to for when I'm fighting high evasion targets. For PvE, the best artifact and Lightstone setup entirely depends on the spot that you're grinding. For demi-human spots, for example, like LVO orcs, the best thing to run is probably the wild demi-humans. When you're fighting human mobs, like at Bloody Monastery, for example, or giants, then you'll want to run the wild human set. If you're grinding in Kama, then you'll want to use the wild Kama Sylvia set. You kind of get the idea. If you're fighting at a non-species spot, like Hex, for example, then you'll probably want to run like Vicious Shadows or All Out Attack. It really completely depends on what spot you're grinding. I would recommend going to Garmoth.com to check the different monster types at the different grind zones. And I would also recommend checking out Zach on YouTube and as well as Twitch. He has full unedited grind hours on his YouTube and he grinds all the time on his Twitch. And he is more than happy to answer questions and help people with PvE on Archer. I'll add a link to his channels in the description. Now I'd like to quickly go over the pre-buffs. Our pre-buffs consist of an AP buff, a ranged AP buff, and a crit rate buff. All of these buffs can be 100% uptime, and you should try to get in the habit of weaving them in as you're dealing your damage, as well as before an engage. So our pre-buffs are Light's Path, which is just RMB, the first shot of Glissade, which is WRMB, and Gaping Darkness, which is WE. These give us a total of 22 AP and 30% crit rate. Typically, as I'm moving around with my ball in Node Wars, I'll constantly be making sure that I have all of these buffs up as we're moving towards the engage. I also want to quickly go over the double Earthshatter bug that's in the game currently. So it's currently possible to cast 2 Earthshatters one after another. This has been in the game since they added the Sunfall change to cast automatically with Earthshatter. You're able to cast the 2 Earthshatters if you input a skill and then cast Earthshatter right as Sunfall is coming off of cooldown. It can be any input, even just a left mouse button, for example. So to do this, it'll look something like this. So you'll just pay attention to your Sunfall cooldown. And as it comes up to about 1 second, you'll input LMB and then Earthshatter, and then you'll Earthshatter twice in a row. Now I'll quickly go over some PvE cookie cutter combos. Archer performs very well at all PvE and BDO, whether it's early game spots like Polys or Sulfur's Mine or Star's End, or like mid game spots like Turos or Orcs or Underground Sakraya, and even the late game spots like Underground Gyfin, Darkseekers, Highlands, etc. With the recent changes to Archer, you can definitely pull very competitive numbers to the best classes in the game. However, keep in mind that the in-game grinding on Archer definitely becomes a lot more sweaty and a high APM compared to these other classes, and you're still very squishy on this class, so it is still very easy to die. One thing to note is to make sure you're using the correct bloom skill depending on what spot you're grinding at. At the in-game spots, you can lock your Grandbloom, and this will make it so that Fullbloom is cast when you press Shift E. This is the melee version of Grandbloom. With the recent changes that they made, it makes it so that the Fullbloom does full damage as long as one of the arrows hit, rather than how it used to be where you had to be like inside the hitbox of whoever you're trying to hit to make sure that every arrow hit. At one-shot spots, like where you have, like when you're doing polys, or if you're like on Elvia with a weapon, for example, you'll want to use the long-range Fullbloom, as this will just completely melt like 3 packs at a time if you're like on a weapon at Orcs, for example. You want to say there's no like concrete best combo, I don't think, when it comes to Archer. It all depends on like where you're grinding, what's off cooldown, how fast you're pressing your buttons and canceling your animations. With that being said, here's like a example of like a cookie cutter combo you can use at like in-game spots. This combo is able to be repeated without having to wait for cooldown, so it's like an infinite combo. It'll be Light's Path, Glissade, Gaping, Covering Fire, Earthshatter, Radiant, Fullbloom, Arced Bloom, Spear, Luthragon, Flow, and then repeat. So that fast would look something like this. Now I'd like to go over all of the protections that we have available to us on Archer. We'll start off with the forward guards. So we have Gaping Darkness. This is a forward guard Stiffen that also gives us our crit buff, and it can be used with your Great Bow out. Critter Clout. which is our forward guard float. It can also be used with your great bow out. This is a great linger as well. As you can see, the skill animation lingers for quite a while, and you linger that forward guard as well. We have Zephyr Leap, which is now SA into forward guard. It's a stiffen. It can be used with your crossbow or your great bow. We have Glissade. This is probably our longest animation forward guard. It is a 3-hit skill, and the last hit is a knockdown. It can be used with your crossbow or your great bow. Keep in mind that you can always cancel out of this skill with things like Meteor Dive. You do not have to commit to the full animation. We now have Arrow Explosion. This is a great forward guard damage option. It has a giant AoE and does pretty decent damage. It's a good mid-range damage skill. It can be used with your great bow or your crossbow. We have Covering Fire. This is a close range damaging skill. It's mainly used to swap stances to go from your great bow to Pre-Awakening and go into an Earthshatter. We still have Sunfall as an option. This is only forward guard if you use it from like the hotbar now. You can't just cast it. And keep in mind that when you use Earthshatter, it will auto-cast and put the skill on cooldown. We have Luthragon. This is your long range forward guard. It's only forward guard while charging. You have a small gap after you shoot it before you can go into another skill unless you take the bond. And then we also have the flow to Luthragon, which is Echoes of the Call. So as you can see, there's only a very tiny gap in between those two skills. Something to keep in mind is you also have an S block, although you don't typically need to use it. Now I'll quickly go over our super armor skills. So we have Glide, which is just our bread and butter basic movement skill. You can use this in any direction. We have Piercing Cry. This is a SA Stiffen, and it's also one of our key movement skills. It can be used pretty much after most pre-awakening skills. We have Meteor Dive. This is an SA multi-hit stiffen movement skill that also ignores collision. So you can go over the top of like enemy forward guards, for example. This skill can be used pretty much after any skill by pressing spacebar. And you can also use it to animation cancel a lot of your skills by pressing spacebar. We also have Ensnare. This skill no longer has our 30% crit buff, but it is still a good super armor skill to throw out whenever you're trying to regain stamina, for example, and it still does have that 20% attack cast and movement speed slow. We also have Radiant Ensnare, which is our Rabomb, Shift Z. As I said, this is pretty much just used to slow the opponent and used as an SA to regain stamina. We have Radiant Explosion. This is your Shift LMB. This is a close range SA skill. It does have a bound on it if you take the bond. We have Righteous Smite, which is an SA long range damaging skill. This is kind of just a big nuke skill. Then we have Piercing Light. This is SA while charging. You'll charge it until your stamina bar is completely depleted. You can sit here for as long as you want. It is unprotected for a split second right after you shoot it. So as you can see, the protection icon dropped there for a split second. This skill you can cancel out of with things like Meteor Dive, so it can be used as like a bait skill. We also have Steady Breath. This is our bread and butter iframe movement skill. It's iframe at the start and SA at the end. We also have Mountain Breeze. This is an iframe into an SA. This SA is lingerable at the end, so you don't have to instantly go into a skill right after you cast it. You can sit there and linger for a bit. This can be helpful for either baiting opponents to make them think that you're just standing there doing nothing, or gaining some stamina. Our iframes are Steady Breath. This is, like I said earlier, our bread and butter movement skill. It is an iframe and it also is a self-heal. We have Mountain Breeze, which I said, it's an iframe into an SA Linger that moves you forward a pretty decent distance. It does have no collision, so it can be used to get behind enemy forward guards to punish, for example. And then we have Tactical Strike. This is an iframe into an unprotected KD shot. This can be very effective for dodging grabs and punishing the whiff animations. It's also a very good follow-up CC skill from range. Keep in mind you don't have to fully commit to the shot at the end. You can just use the iframe and then go into a different skill without having that gap at the end. For example, you can go straight into like a steady breath. Our last iframe skill is BSR Zephyr Leap. This is an iframe into an SA. Like I said earlier, this will be your main BSR spender. Now I'll quickly go over our movement skills. These are some of the skills that you'll be using to maneuver around the fight. When I'm fighting, I always try to be somewhat unpredictable. You don't want to just run in a straight line backwards, for example. You have multiple tools to go through your opponents and even some mouse movement options. I want to try to pay attention to like how your opponent is moving and adapt accordingly. The main skills that you're going to use for movement are Glide, Meteor Dive, Piercing Cry, Mountain Breeze, Steady Breath, Zephyr Leap, Gaping, and Glissade. While mouse moving isn't required, I would say learning mouse move for things like your Meteor Dive and your Piercing Cry can bring another level of unpredictability and even reposition yourself to catch opponents with the Stiffen. A very popular form of movement you have probably heard of for archers called skating. This is a way to move that doesn't consume as much stamina. The way to do it is to weave in this slide shot in between your movement skills. The idea is to animation cancel the shooting part of the slide shot animation so that all you get is that little jump forward. This doesn't consume stamina. One thing to keep in mind, the slide shot portion of moving like this is unprotected. So you really only want to use this if you have like a safe amount of distance. And here's an example of a quick little skating string. I'm not going to go super into detail with this. I went into more detail in my last guide. You can go back and look at that if you want. Do keep in mind also that you can really freestyle this with a lot of your movement skills. This isn't the only string that works. So as you can see, you can cover quite a lot of distance with like very minimal stamina use. Now I want to go over our PvP CCs. So we'll start with Stiffens. Our Stiffens are Piercing Cry, Meteor Dive, Zephyr Leap, Gaping, Light's Trail, and Mark Bloom. Our knockbacks are Earthshatter, First Shot of Double Tap, and Luthragon's. Our bounds are Low Sweep, Earth Kick, which I don't even typically use, I keep this locked, and Purging Shot. This one you can put on your hotbar to use. It does have a down smash attempt, and it can be like a really fun skill to play around with in like 1v1s and stuff. Our floats are Girder Clout or Uppercut and Uproot. Our knockdowns are Wing Strike, the second shot of Double Tap, Piercing Light, Tactical Strike, and the third shot of Glissade. I do want to go over the down smashes as well. The new changes, we actually have quite a few down smashes available to us now. They include Earthshatter, Bow Sweep, Light's Trail, and Echoes of the Call, which is the flow from Luthragon's. We also have, like I said earlier, Purging Shot. You do have to hotbar this skill. It is possible to reset combo if you get a couple of these down smashes to proc, but keep in mind that they're not guaranteed. Now I want to go over our Luthragon and Spear cancels. It's definitely important to learn these cancels to maximize your damage output. There's a number of ways to do this. For Luthragon, one of the most common ways is to simply cancel it with a Light's Path. So you just tap R and B and then input your Luthagons. An animation cancel Luthragon after a lot of things though. These include things like Grandbloom, Marked Bloom, the first part of Uproot, Light's Trail, the first shot of Glissade, Glide, Tactical Strike, and Spear. Keeping all of that in mind, you'll also want to be canceling your Spear of Sylvia animation. As you can see, casting it by itself is really slow. You can do this by inputting it after some of your awakening skills. Some examples of this are Radiant Explosion, Marked Bloom, Grandbloom, a full casted Uproot, Echoes, and Double Tap. Now that we kind of have an idea of our protections, our CCs, and some animation cancels, I'm going to quickly go over a few example combos. Keep in mind there's no like concrete way to combo with Archer. You have many different combo options available to you when you get a catch, and most of it is going to depend on the situation and depend on what cooldowns you have up, what re-CC options you have available, and how pressured you are under the circumstances. Some of the most common ways that I'll re-CC opponents are like Tactical Strike if they're far away, Uproot if I have it cored, Murder Clout if I'm up close. I'll quickly give you a little 1v1 combo example. I would say probably some of your most common catches will most likely be from one of your Stiffens first, like Meteor Dive or Piercing Cry or Zephyr Leap. An example combo with a Meteor Dive catch could look something like this. Meteor Dive into Wing Strike, Gaping, Earthshatter, Uproot to re-CC, into instant cast Luthragon, Flow, Marked Spear. So doing that fast would look something like this. If you get a catch from ranged, full ranged combo would look something like this. Wing Strike into Light's Path, Marked Bloom, Spear, Grandbloom, Tack Strike to re-CC, Luthragon, Flow, Light's Trail, Smite. So that fast would look something like this. One thing to note about Archer is a lot of his range stuff has kind of like a splash damage, and you can get a little bit more range out of things if you aim at the ground in front of who you're trying to hit rather than aiming directly at them. So for things like Piercing Light, if you aim right at the ground in front of this guy, you'll still hit him, for example. This works the same with things like Righteous Smite damage and Marked Bloom. I do want to talk about large scale a bit and try to give some tips that I have used. Archer has definitely become one of the strongest large scale classes in the game. It has very high burst damage from a very far range. I will say positioning is probably the most important thing on Archer. staying moving and adapting to like how your opponents are playing is a big part of how I've found success on the class. For example, at the start of every node war, I'll typically go for a lot riskier plays and see what my opponents will kind of let me get away with. Like I'll play more towards the front of my ball, or I'll go for flanks, etc. You want to use this time at the start of the node war when spawn timers are low to kind of get an idea of just how crazy you can be with your positioning and kind of gauge the other guild's strength that are on the node. I also tend to make more risky plays when I have my V available and I know I can just V if I get CC'd going for some stupid crazy play. On top of that, I would say to make sure that you also stay moving as much as you can. For example, when the engage happens, position in a place to shoot a couple of your damaging skills, like Grandbloom and Spear for example, and then move. Use some of your movement to reposition a little bit, and then plant and shoot some more damage. Standing in one spot for the entire engagement is definitely a sure way to get yourself killed. That's going to do it for this video, guys. This is more of a introductory kind of basics overview for Archer into PvP and PvE. I do have plans on doing a more in-depth PvP guide covering more large-scale stuff, small-scale stuff, and 1v1s. In this I'll go more in-depth on specific class matchups, the things I look to catch and punish, and how I play in like large-scale and node wars and Siege. So keep an eye out for that, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace!